Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for today's Webinar Wednesday, brought to you by UK University Search. This webinar has been really popular, so if any of your friends have been unable to log into the Zoom session, please let them know that they can view the live stream on the UK University Search YouTube really easily. Okay, today we have a special focus webinar for you presented by the University of Roehampton. Last week we looked at choosing a university and the different things you should take into consideration. So this week we're moving on in the process and looking at applying to university. A very important part of your university application is the personal statement, and this webinar will be your ultimate guide to how to put together the perfect personal statement. We'll be exploring how to structure your statement, as well as tips about what to include and what not to. If you've been unable to carry out extracurriculars or work experience due to COVID-19, we'll be working through what to do next as well. As with all our Webinar Wednesdays, we're here to support you. So the final section of this webinar will be focused on answering your questions. So if you're watching on Zoom, please click the Q&A button if you'd like to submit a question, or pop your question in the live chat if you're watching on YouTube. Please be aware that the YouTube chat is monitored by our representatives, and any inappropriate content will be reported to your school or college. We've got lots of fantastic tips for you today, so let's get started. I'm going to pass you over to Donovan from the University of Roehampton now.
Hi, I'm Donovan from Roehampton, so I'll be delivering the session. Just wanted to introduce myself before I share my screen and go through the PowerPoint presentation with everybody. So I studied at Roehampton, I did an education degree, and then now work as a sort of advisor in terms of information advice and guidance for you guys looking to get to university and that transition towards your next step. So I'm just going to share my screen. Brilliant. Okay, so in terms of what we're going to do, as I say, my name's Donovan. We're going to go through some personal statements. There'll be some examples that I use that might be specific to Roehampton, but most of the information is sort of general for you guys to use in terms of your personal statement yourself, no matter where you're applying to throughout the next sort of few months or year, where you are in your cycle towards university. The first thing I'll do is tell you a bit about where I've come from, why we're talking to you guys, how it's going to work. So this is where Roehampton is. We're in southwest London, sort of in the nice green area of near Richmond Park and Barnes and over that way. So best of both worlds is a really nice way to explain it. So if I mention things like that throughout the presentation, it's because that's where we are. This is what our campus looks like. So we have sort of listed buildings where you can have lectures, brand new library, along with accommodation and the other things you would expect throughout your time at university as well. So when you're thinking of personal statements, I'll mention it later on, but do have a think about the atmosphere of the university you're applying to and some of the sort of other aspects you might want to get involved with alongside your course as well. And then these are our 10 academic departments, so ranging from business through to sort of education, English creative writing, all the way through to psychology and social sciences as well. And some things specifically about Roehampton, as I mentioned, but these are useful to think about in terms of personal statements later on as well, is how are you being taught, what's the sort of teaching methods they're being used, and also what facilities and research opportunities are there. So that might be something where you pick out your skills later on that you want to talk about in more detail. And then more specifically, personally, to mention if there are things that you need support with or you would like support with, or you've done research into support that's available, some of the things like disability and dyslexia support or the study support that's available at the universities you're applying to. So that's more specific. And Roehampton has really great teams in all of these sort of areas. So do have a think about these throughout the process. The final bit I'll mention about Roehampton before I move on to personal statements is we've actually got our undergraduate digital open day this afternoon. So from 3 o'clock, if you go to our webpage, then you can join into academic webinar sessions with academics about your course. You can have sort of uni buddy chats with our student ambassadors and academic and support teams. So if you are interested in Roehampton, do join that. You can go onto the website throughout the day and sign up basically for later this afternoon. So in terms of the talk about personal statements, how it's going to work, I'll have a very quick chat about what's included. So some of the sort of sessions is about the various steps and where it fits within the UCAS cycle. Then I'll also talk about how to write it. So how to write each point that you're trying to make, because you can break it down into smaller sections and sometimes that's much easier. And then writing your own. So how actually can you translate the examples I've given into you having your own version and how you can write it for yourself? Because sometimes writing about yourself is sometimes the hardest thing, because if you could write a personal statement about other people, it would be really nice because you like talking about all the great things they've done. But if it's yourself, then it can be quite sort of intimidating sometimes to put those down on paper. So that's something to think about, that process as well. So the way I'm going to start it is to just get some people thinking about whether they think these things are true or false, and I'll obviously give you the answers straight away. So some of the things to think about. So one thing to think about is there is no word limit whether we think that's true or false. So actually, the case is that technically that is true. So the reason that is true is because there is a character limit instead of a word limit. So some people think it's the amount of words they're writing, when actually it's more based on the amount of characters you're writing. So every single full stop, every single letter, every single space that you're using counts towards your character limit, which I'll give you in a second. So you need to include your grades in your personal statement. This is actually false. So as part of your UCAS application more generally, there is the admissions tutors at universities that will receive your grades through the UCAS process rather than through your personal statement. So you don't need to worry about writing your specific grades or predicted grades, or during the current system, the grades your teachers might be providing as your predicted grades. You don't need to worry about writing those yourself into your personal statement. They'll receive those through other parts of your UCAS application process. So don't worry too much if that's the case. The next bit is you write a different personal statement for each course that you apply to. So this one is false. So your 5 options through the UCAS process that you get, so 5 courses that you choose to apply to, you do not write a different personal statement. You write one personal statement, and that is for all 5 of your choices that you've chosen. So it may be that you choose 5 of the same course at different universities, then actually it could be fairly straightforward to write your personal statement, because you are effectively writing for the same course that you're interested in, the same subject you're interested in. You can write about the same skills. It can be quite straightforward and hopefully a bit easier. Some of the times, if you choose some slightly different courses, it might be, so for example, myself, I chose to apply to education studies, primary teaching, and also sports coaching, because I wanted to be involved in sort of teaching and education in some way. But what I did was I had to write a personal statement saying, I've got all these great skills, it's really useful, but actually not mention the specific course, because if I said I really want to be a teacher, if sports coaching were to read that, it might seem a bit strange. So that's something to think about as well. In fact, you get one personal statement for all of your options that you've chosen. So UCAS scans your personal statement for plagiarism, so for copying other people or friends or ones that you can buy online, those sort of things. This is true. So UCAS does have a system where they can sort of check for how much of your personal statement matches word for word or sentences, for example, from other people's personal statements. So it's always worth remembering that. And also, it's a personal statement. They want to hear from you, and they want to hear personal things from you, why you're good as you'll be a good student for them and their course, not necessarily wording from other people's personal statements, just because it sounds good. They want to hear from you about yourself. And then UCAS runs a spell check for you when you submit your personal statement. This is false. So if you were to submit your personal statement or the text you've written for your personal statement with spelling checks or grammar errors and things like that, that's exactly how it will be read by the admissions tutors at universities. So one piece of advice I would always give is to write your personal statement in whatever sort of program it is that you're comfortable using, whether it's Microsoft Word or Pages or anything along those lines. Do it in that, use all the facilities that are available, take advantage of those in terms of spelling and grammar, and also rewriting it many times, and then move it across into the UCAS page and apply then, and put it in that way rather than writing it in the UCAS webpage, because they don't have that facility for you straight away. So just a bit to talk about some of the basic things in terms of the information you might want to know about personal statements. Where does it fit within the UCAS process is probably really important thing to think about first of all. So obviously research is the first thing people will start conducting about universities, trying to find things out about what courses do they like, which universities do they like, where do they want to go to university. People will be setting up their UCAS account or will have already set it up if you're sort of in the later stages of your application. add in your personal details, which is sort of like the school you're studying at, your address, where they can contact you, all those sort of things. And then you reach the point where you've picked your 5 courses, or you have an idea of your 5 courses through the webpage. That is when your personal statement comes into play. So throughout this whole time period, you could have been writing it, you could have been writing sort of certain bits. If you know the subject area you're interested in, you can be drafting it. Then once you pick your 5 courses, that's when you want to be at the stage where you're kind of ready to start submitting it and filling it in, because what follows that is you sending off your application on the UCAS page, and then your school adding, or college adding, their reference on the other side. So they can write a thing saying how great of a student you are, equally why you'd be a good student on the course at that particular university, and they can sort of back you up on some of the things you've said on your personal statement. So it's really good to sort of be writing it as you go, but also to be aware of where it fits within picking your 5 courses and then being before your school adds your reference on their side. So some other things in terms of the basic things to think about is the character count I mentioned. So that is 4,000 characters at the moment, or 47 lines worth of writing approximately. So that's normally how it works out as. It's normally which one is less. So it's 4,000 characters that you can write for your whole personal statement. And then the deadline will be sort of January. This year it was January the 15th. It's very regularly sort of the middle of January time. But one thing I would say to be aware of is please do check this with your school or college, because a lot of the time they'll have internal deadlines. They might want you to get it in before Christmas because they want to add their references in time. And then also it might be a case of checking with your course and your university as well, because some courses in universities, so things like Oxford and Cambridge, and also some medical courses and things like that, they sometimes have an earlier deadline in October. So it's definitely worth checking before you plan your time, and this sort of flow chart that we've got on the screen now, before you start planning towards that, it's definitely worth checking your deadline for your course and your university before sort of planning towards January if it ends up being October. So do be aware of that before you start writing and drafting initially. So having mentioned some of the things about where it fits within the UCAS cycle and how it will work, I now want to talk about how you would write your points, how you would write each point to get it across in the best way to the person that's reading it. Because what's really important to remember is at most universities, these admissions tutors will be reading hundreds of personal statements. It will be effectively, during the recruitment process, such a big part of their job is reading the personal statements and distinguishing between several candidates that might be really interested in their course. So one of the ways to do that is to make it as simple for them to read and as easy for them to say, yes, that's what we really want to achieve through your personal statement. So the best method to do this that we suggest is by writing in an ABC method. So in terms of every single point that you want to make, whether it is the fact that you have studied the subject before, whether it's the fact that you've done lots of outside research, you've done a work experience, you've done online modules, whatever it is you want to mention, each point, try and get it across in this ABC method. So the first one is fairly straightforward. A is to mention the activity that you've done. So that would literally just be one sentence that says, I did a short work experience, or I studied the subject already at A-level and I really enjoyed this particular module, or it could be I have a part-time job in sales at this particular shop. So it could be something like that, which is quite straightforward. Most people will do this naturally. It's then the B that they add on, which is the benefit that you have received from the activity. So it could be a skill you've learned, it could be an experience that you've got. So it might be a case of you had a part-time job in a shop. So the benefit might be that you've been able to develop interpersonal skills and be able to talk to lots of people from different backgrounds. That might be a skill that you've mentioned. And what's really important is that lots of people, I would say probably about 60 to 70% of people will naturally do this A and B part without realizing. Because one of the things when you're writing a personal statement, people tend to write, this is what I did and this is what I've learned from it. And they normally stop there. What's really important for you guys is to try and recognize how important adding the bit that's going to be the C on the end is, because that's the bit that can clinch you sounding different to the majority of people that are writing personal statements. So the C is actually making what you're saying relevant to your course. So some things will seem really obvious. So for example, if you have studied the subject before and you're writing about a module you really enjoyed, you've spoken about a skill you've learned from that, it's really easy to say, and this is how it helped me on the course because I know the content, or I've learned a skill like data analysis, which is really useful in my course. Sometimes, if you're writing about things like being captain of a sports team or something outside of your sort of studies of your subject, you can still make it relevant to your course by picking the skills out and mentioning the fact that maybe leadership or managing a team, things that you could use in terms of group work at university, adding that on the end is what makes you different and makes the decision for the admissions tutors easier for them to say yes, because they can imagine you being on the course if you say, this is how exactly I'm going to use it when I get to university. So it's a really nice way to make yourself sound different, make yourself sound very confident in your ability to study that subject at university, and also to make their job easier in terms of saying yes to you rather than finding barriers in your personal statement. So in terms of an example, I want to chat through. So for example, if someone was to apply to sports psychology at Roehampton, some of the example modules are here. So things like limitations to performance and training, for example. What I would say is if someone had studied physical education and psychology at A-level or BTEC or whatever it is you're studying as your qualification before university, if you have studied a linked course beforehand, writing a personal statement towards these modules will be fairly straightforward. So it may be that you've studied the psychology of how people overcome failure. And even though it's not sports psychology, you can write, I've studied this module and how people assess failure themselves or overcome it. That's why I'd be really interested in studying limitations to performance and training at university, and use the university's own wording back at them without saying, I want to study this specific module at Roehampton, because the other universities might find that strange. You just use the wording and say, I've studied this module, it was really interesting. So limitations to performance and training in sport specifically is something I want to develop further using the skills I've already got. So if you've already studied a subject similarly before, it can be fairly straightforward thinking about how they're relatable to your personal statement and to the course you want to study at university. So that's one way to write an ABC. But what I also want to do is mention transferable skills, because sometimes, if you're like me, when I went to university, I studied a course that wasn't necessarily something I studied at A-level and BTEC. So I studied geography, law, and business at A-level, and then decided to go into education, which wasn't even a subject that my sixth form offered. I couldn't do it at that level, but I really wanted to study at university. So I had to think about a lot of the skills I'd learned outside of my sort of content in my courses to think about what could be relevant to my university studies and how I can say that I'm going to be a good student. So these are some images that represent some of the transferable skills you might want to mention. These could be across a whole range of subjects, and it might be that some of them are more relevant to your course than others. So things like meeting deadlines and timekeeping and things like that will be fairly sort of general across most university courses, because you'll have to meet deadlines with essays or group work, etc. And timekeeping for being on time with handing in work or being on time for work experiences, whatever it is. If you're studying a specific course, you might want to think, for example, when I did mine, when I applied to education and teaching, I picked things like public speaking, because that will be basically a daily thing and part of the role that I'm looking to go into. And also things like verbal communication and problem solving, because they're relatable to the job I wanted to do or the university course I wanted to study, but they were really strong things that I'd got from things like law, because I could problem solve by working out the different stages within a problem from that course, but necessarily hadn't studied education before. So I'm going to give you another example now. So if the same student from before who had studied psychology and a physical education course wanted to apply to drama, theatre and performance studies, that's when they would need to think about, actually, what skills have I learned? What things have I learned in my course or outside of my course even that I can make relevant using the ABC method? So one thing they might do is perhaps think about things like engaging performance. Even though they've done it in physical education, they might be able to choose an example they've done there, perhaps representing their school or college at sports. They could then say, what I've learned is performing in front of a crowd or in front of a group of people, and how that engages the performer, but also how it engages the audience as well in terms of the crowd. And then the C is the bit that makes it really important, because if they were just to write the A and the B point, it doesn't seem that relevant to drama, theatre and performance studies. But actually, if they were to add a bit on the end of that that says, this obviously was undertaken in a sports area, whereas I also, outside of my studies, are involved in drama, theatre and performance productions, and I can take that understanding from what I do within my sports qualification, A-level or BTEC, and actually apply that understanding to a drama setting where I'm able to use it in perhaps a workshop or in a performance or in a play or production, for example. So you can make things relevant that aren't necessarily studying the course beforehand. That's really important to remember, picking out the skills as well as the content if you can in terms of previous subjects. So what's important now is to have a look at some examples of some ABCs, and also for you throughout this whole process of me mentioning some example ABCs is how can an ABC look for you? Because it might be different. You might have a really, really good section in terms of the benefit compared to the course bit might be quite short, whereas other people might switch it around and they might say, the benefit, I've only really got one benefit from this thing I'm mentioning, but the bit for my course, I'm going to write a lot because it's actually really relevant to my course. So it can be sort of a little bit longer in period. So it's really important to recognize that. So here is one example. Is economics is a diverse subject, as economics can be related to anything, especially during economic crisis, which forces to think economically, whereas maths has been long one of my favorite subjects, as mathematics can be applied everywhere. Moreover, mathematics is useful in everyday life. So if as an admissions person, so imagine you are the admissions tutor right now reading this statement as part of a personal statement, what you'll probably realize is there's actually multiple points within one point here. So the first bit they say is economics is a diverse subject, and the fact that they sort of believe economics can be related to anything, which is really great, but they've not actually given a specific thing that they have done. This is more of a belief around the subject. They also go on to mention mathematics within the same point, so it's a very long sentence. This could really be 2 points if they wanted it to be. They could break up into 2 points and really actually expand on each of the points properly. So they could say that economics is a diverse subject, maybe give a reading that you've done, name a book or a webinar or something you've attended, be really specific in giving examples, then give a benefit. So it might be things like the benefit might be, and I realized that actually economics can be related to anything and wider society as well. And then you would mention the C, saying it means that I can apply it to my course, even if I'm not studying economics, I'm studying maths, or the other way around. You can do it that way. It's really about expanding each point, making it relevant to your course along the way. Another thing that might be worth people doing in terms of your own ABCs is basically starting from a list. So instead of sitting there with a blank page, because sometimes that can be really daunting, trying to sit there with a blank page or blank Word document and write straight away your introduction and all the way through. That's really, really hard to do. One of the suggestions I like to make is actually sit down and write down a list of just all of the cool things that you've done that you think will be relevant. So it might be being captain of the netball team, having a part-time sales job, and being your head of year. So they might be the 3 things you write down. And then maybe the next day or later on in the day, you go back to your list and you add in the skills you've learned from it. So things like underneath the captain of the netball team, you write things like, I was managed to prove teamwork because we worked together successfully. I had some leadership skills and made some decisions for other people because I was managing them as their captain and things like that. So just adding the next layer of depth. And then what I would do maybe the next day is go back into this list and add in the C bit. So have a think about how can that teamwork and leadership and decision making be relevant for my course. So it might be that if I wanted to study business, it could be that I could manage a team in the workplace, or if I'm doing a group study at university, I can be the person that makes decisions when it comes to crunch time in terms of getting our project done on time or making decisions to make it successful. That's the bit you add in for the C at the end. So writing it as a list like this gives you all of the information before you get to the point where you're writing it in full sentences. So it's a really nice approach to work your way gradually towards writing your full personal statement. You can have a lot of the content and the stuff you want to write in your personal statement ready to go before you're writing full sentences and being stuck in terms of writing it fully in one go. So that's a nice approach to use. And then here's one example that I worked through with a student when we were at a one-to-one session. So it says, I completed an 8-day work experience at primary school where I was able to lead small group work and activities. This experience gave me the opportunity to develop my public speaking, understanding of social interactions in primary settings, and effective approaches to introducing new content. These are 3 skills I'll be able to take forward onto my course, benefiting both my ability to research and write confidently with examples, and also implement in my classroom practice. So it's not completely perfect, but it's far stronger than the first version we heard where it was sort of very long sentences. It's quite clear in its introduction in terms of the ABC method. So I'll show you now is a section highlighted in yellow is effectively the activity. So that's them within one short sentence saying, I completed an 8-day work experience at a primary school and I was this is what I did. I did small group work and I led some activities on my own. I would say you could possibly go even further than this and potentially name the school if you know that you're confident that they're happy for you to do that, just because it proves to the person reading it that you're even more confident in the fact of, you know what, I did do this, it went really well, and I'm really proud to say that I went to that school specifically, or workplace, or wherever it is. So naming places can be really, really crucial in terms of sounding more real to the person reading it. The other thing they've done here is they've actually been specific with the activity they've done. So they've said, I led small group work and activities, because they could have actually just stopped at, I completed a work experience at the primary school. What they've done is they've added in the next layer of the activity in terms of, let's build upon that and give examples of things I've actually done. So even if it's in part-time job, you can say that I've developed like cash handling skills, or I've worked with money, or I've worked with people from different backgrounds. You can give that example and pad it out a bit more, make it really sort of in-depth. And then the final bit with the activity that they've done really well here is they've been specific with how long they've done it for. So they said, I completed an 8-day work experience. It sounds a lot more real to the admissions tutor than just saying, I completed a work experience at a primary school. By giving details like how long it was, you can do that in days, you can do it in hours, you can do it in weeks, however long it is that you've done there in terms of your work experience, or even just an online course. You could say that I did an 8-hour online course, or I did a 6-module online course, or I attended 4 webinars, whatever it is. Being specific with things can actually make it seem much more real to the person reading it. So the next bit, so the purple section, is the benefit. So they've clearly within one sentence again mentioned actually 3 benefits that they've got from their activity that they've done. So the first one is obviously they've developed their public speaking, which is one of the transferable skills we mentioned. They've spoken specifically about understanding more the setting that they're going to be working in, that they want to work in. And then they've also mentioned the content, so some sort of content that they've learned. So effective approaches of introducing new things to children as part of their learning. So they've given 3 really good examples in quite a short space of time without needing 3 separate points for each one. So it's a nice way to do your benefit that way. And then hopefully people have worked this out, but the red section at the end is the bit where they've made it relevant to their course. So this is where they've said all 3 of these will link back to my course basically, and it will benefit me in these ways. So it said they'll be able to do better research, so they'll be able to find things out better. They'll be able to write more confidently and use their examples in their essay writing. And when they go on their placements, they'll be able to use it in their classroom practice and their teaching. So they've really sort of thought about their course and done some research into what they're going to be doing on their course, because they'll be doing some research, they'll be doing some essay writing, and they'll be doing placements in class. So they've made sure to make it relevant to all 3 of them. So this is actually a really strong sort of ABC and quite a good example for you guys to have a think about. What points could I pick from my personal statement to write in this way and make it sound as engaging? Because if you were to read this as an admissions tutor, it's actually quite hard to say that it's not relevant. It's quite hard to say, do you know what, this person isn't great for the course, because it's really said to them quite clearly and made in a really, really clear manner. So they're more likely to say yes when reading it. So having thought about ABC methods and each point that you want to make, this is from our sort of admissions team when we sat down with them. This was a general sort of overview that they gave as a suggestion to the structure of your personal statement. So they say about 10% of your character count should be on your general introduction as to sort of what you're interested in, all that sort of stuff in terms of introducing what you're going to be talking about later on in your personal statement. Then the biggest section obviously is going to be why you want to study your course in particular and your understanding already of the course. So it might be the fact that you understand you already have certain skills, and this is where your ABC method comes in really importantly. Do some research about the skills that they're wanting in your course. So look at prospectuses, look online, attend academic webinars at the moment because there's lots of them going on. Think about the skills they're mentioning. Are they in psychology, for example, mentioning lots of data analysis? In that point, it's probably worth thinking of an activity you've done where you've used some data analysis and you can mention it, because that will show your understanding of the course that you're interested in. Then once you've done sort of that main section, you move to a slightly smaller section about your experience and skills. So this could be some things potentially like work placements. It could be volunteering. It could be being a representative for your class or your year at school, something like that, where it's not necessarily studying the subject before, but still experiences that will give you skills towards your course that are relevant. And then again, a slightly smaller section further down is more outside of your studies and outside of your school life, is there anything that you're achieving that you can actually engage with as hobbies and interests? So it might be you have a particular hobby that you're successful in and you want to mention it and say, I still would want to represent the university in this and be engaged in student life. It might be you have a particular skill. So for example, you might know British Sign Language and you think, I've noticed the university doesn't have this as a society. I'd love to come in and introduce it as a society and teach other people at the university, potentially other students, other staff members, things like that. Contributing to the university life is really important as a little bit at the end. So the main important bit is why you're good at the course. What experience and skills have you got that will make you a great candidate? And this little bit at the bottom is just to make you a little bit different in terms of this is what I can also contribute to the wider university as well. And then of course, a conclusion to remind them that you're going to be a strong candidate and that you thank them for their time for reading it. One top tip that our admissions team always tend to give us in terms of writing personal statements is don't worry if you're stuck with writing your introduction. So writing your introduction last is a perfectly okay approach to doing it. Sometimes, as I said before, you end up with this blank document where you're trying to start writing your introduction and it's really, really tough. What I would suggest is start writing the ABC sections first. So do what I said before, write that list of all the things you think you're going to write about, your activities, add in the benefits, add in the courses, and then eventually write those in full sentences. And you'll have the second, third, and fourth section of this template already sort of on its way. Once you've written all of your key content and the key areas you want to talk about, it's then much easier to write your introduction. So you can actually say, these are the 3 things I'm going to mention. I'm going to mention my work experience. I'm going to mention my current subjects. And I'm also going to mention the fact that I volunteer on the weekends. You can use that very briefly in your introduction because you know you're writing about it later on. What our admission teams have said to me in the past is quite often students will write things in their introduction, say, I'm going to talk about these 3 or 4 things. And then they actually run out of space in their personal statement, don't write about it, but it's still, that statement is still in their introduction and they can't read it. So it's really important to make sure your introduction and your main section link together, but you can do it by writing the main section first because that's the main body of your personal statement. So some general sort of do's and don'ts. We're going to have sort of 4 do's and 4 don'ts and then some general advice afterwards as well. So one of the 4 do's is do some research into your course and your university you're interested in. As I mentioned before, it's really important to notice the key skills that keep popping up across your 5 choices. So if you're applying to the same course at 5 different universities, what skills are they all mentioning? Is it public speaking? Is it ability to sort of work in groups? Is it research skills? Is it lab work that they want you to be able to do if it's sort of science-based or psychology-based? If it's coming up across all of your subjects, it's probably worth thinking what activities, benefits, and things like that can I talk about that are relevant to that to prove I'm good at it. So it's really important to engage with your research early on and keep doing that research throughout as sort of your university choices maybe change or your interests change. One way I like to prove that you've been doing research when you're writing personal statements is if there's a key phrase that a particular university is using. So for example, I mentioned earlier, Roehampton in sports psychology mentioned limitations of performance, the limits that performance might bring, without saying, I really want to study this particular limitations of performance module at Roehampton and offending the other universities or confusing the other universities. What you can do is say, I'm really interested in limitations of performance within sports psychology and how that could be developed further within my research or within my studies at university level. And actually by doing that, if someone from Roehampton was reading it and they had the course information in front of them, they would know straight away that you've done extra research and you are really keen in studying that. So it's a very clever way of using key terminology that universities are interested in back towards them so that they recognize the amount of research and effort you're putting in to actually studying with them and their courses. The second one, please do write multiple drafts. It makes it much, much better reading wise for the admissions tutors if you've written it multiple times and you've managed to get multiple edits in. Because if it's written in one go, quite a lot of time it reads like the first example we went through today, where there's very long sentences or there's multiple points joined together in a way that doesn't really help the ABC method. So what I would say is if you can write multiple drafts, it really does help your points become clearer and actually more edited so that they fit that ABC structure much better. Obviously, going hand in hand with writing multiple drafts is starting early. If you're to start 2 or 3 days before the deadline that your school or college sets, it's fairly difficult to write multiple drafts within that time. So what you can do is start writing nice and early. do the list, as I say, the bullet points of what you've achieved, start adding bits in slowly, getting towards the point where you've got a full draft, then you can edit it as well later on. So it actually makes things much easier for you in terms of time management. And then one of the final things would be make sure that you do proofread what you've written before it's handed in. So you proofread it, also get school and college staff to proofread it if they're available, and finally get sort of friends and family to proofread it as well. It seems really silly, but I'll give you the example of myself. When I wrote my personal statement, I thought it was amazing. It was ready to go. I was saying to my tutor at sixth form, I was going to send it off. I was literally just going to click the button. She was like, let me read it before you send it off. And what happened was she read it and I had 3 of the word "and" in a row in one sentence. So I'd read what I wanted it to say, but actually what she did is she sat down and read what it actually said on the paper and said to me, this really doesn't look good because it looks like you've not bothered to sit and read it once you've written it, which I had, but I knew what I wanted to say. So I was reading it as what I thought it said. So it's really important to get other people to read it. People that sort of might not have heard of your experiences before. So like teachers reading stuff about your voluntary work or your part-time jobs and things is really good because they'll give you honest feedback in terms of how it's written, as well as the content you've chosen. And then in terms of don'ts, one of the really key things is don't undersell the things that you've done. So you might think, oh, I've only done an 8-day work placement. That's what the student that I'd spoken to with the previous example was saying. They were saying, I've only done an 8-day work experience. Some people have done lots more than that. But actually, what's really important to recognize is 8 days is a great work experience. Universities will love it if you've done 8 days work experience. So highlight those things and be really confident in the way that you're putting them across in terms of these are a great thing and I've learned lots of good things from them. So don't undersell the things that you've done. The next one, don't use quotes, but what's really important is if you are super keen to use quotes, you obviously can, but it's really worth mentioning when you're using quotes, you're actually using up your characters within those 4,000 characters on someone else's writing. So what's really key is it's a personal statement for a reason. They want to hear from you guys. They want to hear about what you've done. They want to hear about why you think it's important and why you think you'll be a good student at their course. Using quotes sometimes can work, but actually, as I say, you're using a significant amount of characters to mention someone else's viewpoint or someone else's statement. So it's much better to sort of name a book or name a webinar that you've attended very quickly in terms of the name of it or the title, and then talk about your views on it or what you've learned from it afterwards. That's the most important thing. And the next one, obviously we mentioned it very briefly earlier, but don't plagiarize or copy your personal statement from ones. You can obviously read through examples and get help, as I say, on the ABC method or approaches to writing it or the things you might want to talk about in terms of the activities you want to pick. That's a good thing you can do, but please don't plagiarize because there are methods in place to have a look at how they can sort of check whether you are plagiarizing. So do be aware of that. And then the final one, please don't lie. The whole point is they want to hear from you and things you've done. They don't want to hear the made up things that you think are really good and the things you think will be really successful. There are things, like I say, that you don't have to have studied the subject before at some universities. So it could be that you pick experiences outside of that and make them relevant through the transferable skills and make them relevant through your experience that you've learned and what skills you've learned. So you don't need to lie. There's no need to do it. It's just being honest about the things you've done and actually making them sound positive in a really great way. That's the best thing to think about. So some common mistakes that people tend to make is very similar to that first example, is only listing things and not linking them back to the course. That's where your personal statement starts to become repetitive, starts to read as if it's just a list of all the things you've done in sort of sixth form or secondary school. Actually, what's really important, like I say, is saying, this is why I will be good at the course. This is why I'll be a great student. And I'm going to use these skills to do this specific thing whilst I'm there. The next one, undersell themselves. So a lot of the time people do say, I did a work experience and I learned this, rather than saying, I did a week-long work experience. I was able to teach groups, or I was able to talk to customers and clients when I did it with this sort of firm or whatever it is. Just make it sound really amazing, everything that you've done. Don't show evidence of wider research. So if you are going to, during this time period at the moment, sit and do some readings or do some webinars and stuff, maybe before you do that, have a look at the reading lists that some universities publish online, because you might want to read a book or a section from a book that is on their reading list. And that will prove that you've done a lot more wider research than some people who are just doing random readings on the same subject. Don't understand the course they're applying to. Sometimes the courses, there are very specific versions of each course. And I would say do some research into what skills are more relevant for each one. That's really important. Using quotes, as I say, can be overused, but most of the time it is still good. You can use them if you really want to. And then being unable to start, that listing method where you start with your key activities, you then add in the benefits in bullet points, and then you add in how it's going to help you on the course in bullet points, is a really, really strong way to avoid being unable to start, because that can be a tripping point for an awful lot of people in terms of personal statements. So what I thought I would also do is give you some examples in terms of things you could be doing now, because I know a lot of people might have questions that are going into the Q&A or later on when we can answer questions out loud in terms of what can I be doing now for a personal statement, because I might have been planning to do a work experience or get part-time work, etc. So just some examples you could be doing from home are things like online learning courses. So this is an example of an online course that Roehampton have put together with the Future Learn through their website. It's completely free. Obviously, it's specific for tutors, or if you want to study a history degree, it'd be really good to do. But there are so many versions of similar courses out there that you could be doing during this time at home. And it proves that you're willing to put in the effort to learn specific modules, or you're willing to just commit the time to invest in that subject and be engaged in it and be willing to sort of take it forwards and understand more about it. That's a really, really strong way to do it, and to prove to people that you're committed towards developing your knowledge even further. So you would be doing this when you're at university. You take your spare time to learn more, not necessarily just go to the lectures and then go home again. It's a really good way to use some of the time at the moment that you might have. One of the other things you might be able to do is our schools and colleges teams. So where I work at the moment is we actually have some resources on our website, which are basically things like information sheets that go alongside sort of this presentation. We have things about how to choose the right university, and we also have things along student finance, all that sort of stuff. Lots of universities will have things like that. So please do check out our website and university websites for these resources, because you can write about that in your personal statement and say, I actually went and I looked at a subject specific piece of information on this university's website, and it really helped me because I was able to learn this piece of knowledge. So it could be even doing things like that you write about in your personal statement. And then a final one, which is really, really a hot topic at the moment, is something that is becoming more and more available over the coming weeks, is attending online webinars, whether they're live or whether you watch them after the fact like this one. Attending today is great. All of this sort of stuff you're doing right now is a really strong thing towards your personal statement. But there will also be things like academic sections you can attend. So like our open day this afternoon, you'll get a session with an academic about your course. You can write about that in your personal statement and say, I attended an example lecture. So throughout the next month, we've got webinars around things like accommodation, the fact that budgeting at university, and we've also got subject specific ones. So it'll be law and journalism. Journalism's next week, things like that. If you're interested in studying journalism and you've attended an online actual lecture, so it's a very short version of an actual lecture, you can say in your personal statement, I've already experienced kind of what the content of a lecture will be like, and I really enjoyed it. These are the things I learned from it, and I actually liked about it. And people reading it will realize, okay, they've understood, they've been to a lecture online, they've realized what a lecture might include and how it might be structured, and they're still interested in the subject and they can pick out the key things. So that's really important skill to have, is the fact that you've experienced that online and committed your time to doing it. So that's one thing I would say definitely to look at, is academic webinars and support webinars that are available at the moment. And then as I'm sort of coming towards the end of this, I wanted to give you some sort of 3 top tips towards going away and either starting or continuing or finishing the personal statement where you're at the moment. So first thing would be do your research, whether that is finding the right course or finding key phrases you can use or finding the skills that come up repetitively. That's really important. The next one, give examples. As I mentioned with the personal statement when we showed their ABC that was really successful, they gave examples, they were specific, and also they were giving examples of the actual things they did on that activity, not just saying, I did a work experience, and I did all of these cool things. And then last one is show enthusiasm. Be enthusiastic, prove the fact that you enjoy the subject and actually really want to get involved when you're at university, not just with your subject, but also with university life as well, whether it's through societies, events, being a course representative, if you're interested in representing people at university and fighting for their cause as well, that can be a really good way of showing enthusiasm. The one thing at the moment is using the word passion lots and lots happens when people write personal statements, because it's the most common way to say how you're so enthusiastic about something. But make sure that you're using a variety of words and a variety of phrases to get that across in each point, and not repeating the fact that you're really passionate about a certain thing over and over again within your ABC methods, if you're using the ABC for multiple points. And then sort of final recap of some of the key things you might want to remember in terms of stats, etc. So the character limit for your personal statement, as I mentioned earlier, is 4,000 characters or 47 lines worth of writing approximately. So obviously you can use that on word processors or pages that mention things like that. You can highlight the text and then look at the word count. If you click on the word count, it tells you the character count exactly. So you can keep an eye on the track of it as you're moving along. The ABC method, what does the ABC stand for? Hopefully people can remember it's activity, benefit, and course. As I say, they're equally important. They don't have to always be in exactly one sentence each. It might be that your activity is one sentence, your benefit's 2 sentences, and your course is 1 sentence. So it's just a nice way to make sure you've got your structure. And as I say, you're making it as easy as possible for these admissions people to say yes and actually enjoy reading your personal statement and agree with the things you're saying about you being great on your course. And then it's also really important to have a bit of reflection time and think, what is the purpose of writing a personal statement? Why are universities asking me to do it? Why do they want me to write this personal statement as part of my application? And really, the main thing they want you to do is to sell yourself as a great student for their course. They want to hear from you why you'll be a good student for them, because this personal statement is effectively the only chance that you guys get to actually talk and hear from you, because most of your UCAS information will come in the same format for every single student. They'll get your grades, they'll get what school you've attended, they'll get all of that sort of stuff and the subjects you've studied before in the same template format from UCAS for everybody. What's really important is this is your opportunity to get across your personal side, your experiences outside of your studies, your experiences in your studies that you think are really relevant, and you want to highlight them and why you'd be good at it. So do take advantage of the opportunity to be structured, but also get across, like I say, your enthusiasm for that subject and the course you're interested in. And then my last slide is basically to say those resources that I mentioned earlier on. So in terms of helping with choosing uni, with sort of student finance, all that sort of stuff, there's also things around stress management and time management at the moment, which can be really useful in terms of writing about that in your personal statement. The link is at the bottom just there that you can have a look at. You can put that into your browser, etc. And also we've got lots of social media things where loads of updates are coming out on what Roehampton are doing to support you guys in terms of webinars, and also general things that we can offer in terms of general webinars that are coming out elsewhere as well. So do try and keep up to date with us, but also keep up to date with things like student finance and also any universities you're interested in along the way. But our social media channels are really promoting all the webinars and things like that. So it's really key to keep engaged with those. And then what I would say is thank you very much for attending today. We're going to sort of slightly early, but I think we're going to move across to the Q&A session where I'll be able to answer some questions hopefully out loud for you guys to hear, the ones that are sort of relevant to everybody along the way. So if you have any questions, do keep getting them in throughout that time. Thank you.
That was really useful. Thank you so much, Donovan. I'm sure a lot of you found that everything that Donovan was talking about there really insightful. I hope he gave you a lot of tips and that everything was broken down really clearly. We are now going to pass over for some questions. Thank you to everyone who's been sending these in, both on Zoom and YouTube. Mandy, who's one of Donovan's colleagues, has been answering some of your questions in the chat on Zoom, but some of them we are going to work through on the webinar now as well. So firstly, we're going to start with a question for Donovan. This is one that's been coming up quite a lot. When do you think students should start drafting their personal statements, and how many drafts did you have to do before you got to the final one?
Yeah, so I think that I'm just going to end sharing my screen if I can. Sorry. So in terms of when to start, I would say with the list bit that I was mentioning, so writing that list of the activities you've done and things like that, you can even do it on your phone. I would say do that straight away. Just keep that list updated all the time. And then in terms of writing an actual full draft, I would say if you can start writing it over the summer of probably year 12, if not the end of year 12, so the end of year 12 going into the summer, start writing it down. You then have the chance to edit it over the sort of 3 or 4 months when you return into year 13, because most schools and colleges will want that returned within sort of November, December time. So I think it's really important to sort of have your draft ready during the summertime at latest. When you come back in September, you've got some sort of full version written, even though you know it's not the sort of completed version that you're going to want. And then you've got sort of September, October, and probably some of November before your schools and colleges asking them to be handed into them. to actually edit it and add in any bits you did on over the summer or any sort of webinars you attended in September time. You can add those in and add the final things. In terms of me, I ended up doing, I think it was about 5 or 6 different versions, but that was mainly because, like I say, I applied to a variety of courses. So I applied to ones where I had to be really specific with the skills I was picking, because it's a little bit tricky sometimes to make the skills relevant to different courses, like I was mentioning with the transferable skills. So it was really important for me to do quite a few versions to make sure it read in the right way for all of the courses that we're going to be reading it. So that's one thing to think about as well. If you're writing to multiple courses, you might need to plan even further in advance.
Thank you very much, Donovan. Next up is a question for Mandy. This is also one that we've been getting a lot, also on YouTube especially. Some applications such as dentistry or medicine require work experience to receive an interview or go further in the application process. How can I get alternative experience at this time, especially if the applications are going to be due in by October?
Hey everyone, there are lots of different ways that you can be getting experience during lockdown. One of the ways you can do this for a medical related degree is by checking all your university choices. Check their websites. Most universities right now are offering alternative digital opportunities. For example, at Roehampton, although we do not offer any medical degrees, we do offer taster sessions in all the subjects that we have on the scheme. So next week we'll be running one on psychology, and the week after that we'll have some more. And most universities are doing things like this right now. So that not only helps you learn about the course, but it also shows your content knowledge. And all universities, especially universities that have medical programs, understand the situation right now. And they also understand that you can't get work experience. So you just have to look at alternative opportunities like going to taster sessions, going to digital open days, talking to professionals from that field. LinkedIn is a good way to try and reach out to those professionals to get this type of experience as well.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Next up, we've got one for Donovan. So when you're applying to your 5 different universities, can other universities see which ones you've applied to after you've submitted your personal statement?
Okay, so I believe when you submit your personal statement, it will go basically to your 5 universities, but they will only see the part of your application which has gone to them. So they'll see the information you filled in, your personal information, they'll see your personal statement, but they'll read it as if you have directed it to them and to them only. They don't necessarily see that you've picked University A as one of your other choices. They won't see that list of universities that you've chosen. So the only way that would come up is, as if I mentioned before, if you were to write, I really want to study this specific module at the University of Roehampton and I'm really interested. If one of your other universities was reading that personal statement, that's when they would realize, actually, this sounds a bit strange, you're applying to us, but you've written about this module. So what I would say is if you can write about the skills and the experience and pick those out from the universities you're interested in, they won't necessarily at any point see the other universities you've chosen, if that makes sense, through their UCAS information they're going to get, including your personal statement.
Thank you, Donovan. Next up, we've got a question for Mandy. In your personal statement, should achievements only include those from sixth form, or can you include achievements from year 10 or 11 as well?
You should definitely include achievements throughout your life. Don't just think about the last couple of years, think about your whole lifetime, especially now because of this lockdown situation. So I always say when I go out to visit schools that if you've been doing a hobby since you were really young, that shows the skill of dedication. So these are the types of things you should be including. Don't just think about the last couple of years, try and think about your whole lifetime when you think about things to put in your personal statement.
Thank you, Mandy. Next up, one for Donovan. What do I need to mention in the introduction and conclusion of my personal statement?
Your introduction, as I say, I would mention basically saying these are the 3 or 4 things I'm going to talk about later in my personal statement. So it might be you say something along the lines of I'm going to talk about my work experience I've received, or talk about the subjects I'm currently studying and modules that have really helped me with my university application. And then in terms of the conclusion, I would just reiterate some of the key points that you've mentioned earlier. So what's really important with a conclusion is not to necessarily mention anything new, because an admissions tutor might sort of come out of this remembering the final point that you've made. So what you want to say is maybe something along the lines of, I feel like I'd be a really strong candidate for studying your course at university because of the work experience I've gained, the skills I've learned from it, potentially the subjects I'm already studying and the impact they've had upon my ability to learn in the way that I want to learn at university. Something like that, where it's quite general but recaps everything you've mentioned. They'll go away remembering everything rather than necessarily remembering one new point you've mentioned right at the end. So that's a really good thing with conclusions. But yeah, the introduction and conclusion is sort of recapping what you've mentioned either later or earlier on.
Thank you, Donovan. And now one for Mandy. How do you write a personal statement if you want to apply for a few different courses?
This is a great question, and actually it's really relevant to when I applied to university. So I actually studied philosophy, but when I was applying to university, I was also interested in politics. So with all my 5 choices, it was quite a mixed bag between politics and philosophy, or just political science. And the best way to get a good balance of both is actually to do this really good activity. So once you've done your research into universities that offer those courses, so let's use philosophy and politics as an example, you then need to go into the actual course structure. So especially for subjects that are really broad, so sociology, history, there are so many different eras that you could be studying. You want to make sure the university offers modules that are relevant to what you're interested in. So then you need to do your modular research. And as you do your modular research, you'll start whittling down your list of universities that you want to apply for. And eventually you'll get to 5 universities. When you've got your 5 universities, go through their structure and write down the modules that you're interested in. And these are the 5 universities you're going to apply to on UCAS. So if you write down all these modules, don't write down what university they're from, but write down a list and then try and find ones that are similar between those universities. Like obviously your interests are very specific. So eventually you will find modules that all of the universities offer or similar ones. And then you need to put those modules and that sort of academic content into your personal statement. And that way you've covered all your bases.
That was really useful. Thank you, Mandy. Now one for Donovan. I'm thinking of applying to study a joint honours course, but I've only studied one of the subjects at A-level. How can I show subject knowledge in my personal statement if I haven't actually studied it at school?
Yeah, so I think this is where I think Mandy's mentioned it already in the Q&A, this is where proving that you're going above and beyond to prove your interest in the second subject is really important. So attending things like the subject webinars, completing some of maybe the online courses, like I mentioned, the Roehampton example of earlier, doing things like that can actually be where you can get the content section from in terms of proving you're interested in it and learning a bit about it. But what's also important, as I mentioned earlier, is potentially with the second subject, you might want to talk more about the transferable skills you've got that are relevant for it. So it might be the public speaking side, it might be the data analyzing, or it might be sort of IT skills if it's something to do with those subjects. So potentially for the secondary subject, that might be where you move towards talking about the skill-based side of it rather than the content-based side, which you could talk about for the one you've already studied. It might be quite a nice balance to do it that way. The other thing to be careful with is if you're applying to a joint honours course at all 5 universities, then that's quite a nice way to do it. But if you're applying to just one joint honours one and all single honours at the other ones, that's where it can become mentioning skills is even more important because the other ones will read it in a different way. So it's really important to pick the balance in skills and content carefully. And also, if you haven't studied it before, it can lean you towards picking skills rather than content. Is a nice way to sort of help yourself in that situation.
Thank you, Donovan. Now one for Mandy. So personal statements seem to be focused a lot more on experience, on skills, on things you've studied, but should you include your future plans in your personal statement too?
Of course, you should include your future plans. So it really depends. Everyone's really different. So for those that know what career path they want to take, so if you want to do a nursing degree, a law degree, something along that line, of course, there's a specific degree you should be doing. So of course, say whatever field you would like to go into. For others, you have no idea what you want to do. And that was literally me at your age. I had no idea what I wanted to do in the future, but I decided to study something that I really enjoy, which is my biggest piece of advice. Make sure you study something you enjoy. You don't need to talk about a specific career aspiration. You can just talk about your passion for the subject, which is why most people go to university. They're passionate about a subject, they're passionate about a degree, and therefore they decide to study that route.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Now we've got a question for Donovan. And so you have mentioned that you shouldn't really be mentioning other university names in your personal statement. But if you've carried out a pathway scheme or a summer school at a specific university, should you be mentioning the name in your personal statement?
Yeah, so in terms of not mentioning university names, the way that I mentioned that was in case of saying, I would like to study at this particular university. That's the way I would say avoid mentioning that, because that's where universities will read it in a strange way. If you're mentioning, for example, if you've done like the Pathways to Law scheme that we run at Roehampton and things like that, or a summer school or something along those lines, then do mention the university you've done it at, or the organization you've done it with, or whatever sort of charity that have helped fund it, things like that, because that's being specific with your activity. It's not necessarily proving a preference in your personal statement as to where you would like to study. So that's a lot more expanding your A for the ABC and being specific, which makes it better when you read it. So saying, for example, I did the 2-year Pathways to Law program at the University of Roehampton, and I learned all of these skills from it in public speaking and content knowledge about being a lawyer, for example. That's really good, and universities wouldn't read that in a way of, why have you done it with them and not with us? They'll read it in a way of, it's great that you've done it and you've been engaged with a university. So it's more a case of not specifically saying, I want to study this particular module at this university. If your module is across all 5 choices that you're wanting to apply to, then you can mention the fact that you really want to study that module, because it could be for any of them. So that's the way it kind of should be done in terms of, if you're mentioning it for a Pathways or a summer school or something like that, then yeah, you can definitely mention and be specific with your activity.
Thank you, Donovan. Now we've got a question for Mandy. How do you get your personal statement to not just sound like a list of your achievements?
That's a really good question, and it can be really hard. The best way to think about your personal statement is in 5 separate paragraphs. So you definitely don't want to be listing things, but make sure they're relevant. So at least 60% of your personal statement is going to be about your subject. So that's talking about subject content, modules, what led you to being interested in criminology or sociology. So that's a big section. And then you've got your hobbies. Obviously, you don't want to list these hobbies, but every time you talk about a hobby, link it to a skill. That way you're not listing all of your different achievements as well. Also, you only have 4,000 characters, so make sure everything you're saying is relevant, because you cannot go over that character limit, which many of you have asked in the question section. So make sure when you're thinking about the things you're going to be putting in there, make sure they're relevant, they link to a skill, and that you're at least, if they don't link to a skill, then they need to be linking to some type of academic knowledge or modular knowledge about the subjects that you're applying for.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mandy. Now, I've just got one last question, which we're going to pose to both of you. So students who are in year 12, year 11 right now even, what's the one last piece of advice that you would want to give them about personal statements? We'll start with Donovan.
I would say it's the one piece of advice I would give is it's sort of an ongoing document. I think a lot of people think of it as this one piece of writing that I'm going to write that reflects on it from this one point in time. But actually what you need to think of it as sort of like a document that you're going to keep updating, hopefully over the next year or 2 years or whatever it is, because if I could go back and do it now, that's what I would do. So I was saying, for example, earlier, having that list of just activities that I could write about on my phone in the notes, just listing those, and basically when you've done something, just add it to that list, because in 6 months' time, you might forget about what you've done, and actually it's super relevant to what you want to do later on when you change your mind to a different subject, perhaps. So I would just say, do think of it as this document that's going to keep changing. It's not necessarily going to be written in one go, and it's also not necessarily from one moment in time. It's built up over years and years of things that you've done. So that's the way to approach writing it, as well as thinking about the content for it.
I definitely agree with Donovan. It's a working document. And if you're in year 12 right now, you might want to think about starting to draft it already, because you can take all summer drafting it, which is generally what we suggest. After you write one draft, a really good activity for you to do is to give that draft to a friend or a family member. Ask them to read the personal statement, turn the personal statement over, and on a plain piece of paper, write down all the things that they remember. If they don't remember the key skills, the key modules that you want an admissions advisor to remember, then they're the things that you need to be working on. You need to try different activities to figure out if what the admissions advisor would be reading is the stuff that you want to come across.
Thank you very much, Donovan and Mandy. We have now finished our Q&A session today, unfortunately. If you've asked a question on Zoom, then Mandy and Donovan will be working through a few of these at the end of the webinar. So don't fear if you haven't got an answer just yet. If you haven't received an answer to your question on YouTube, or if you have something that you'd like to ask, then definitely go onto the University of Roehampton's website. You'll find contact details for their student recruitment team there, and you can direct all of your questions over, and I'm sure they'll be happy to help you. So if we weren't able to answer your question today, we will be back next week with another webinar Wednesday. So we'd love to see you again then. Next week, the University of Kent will be talking about student finance. So if you'd like to take part in the webinar, you can either register for the Zoom session by visiting our website, that's www.ukuniversitysearch.com, and clicking on the Webinar Wednesday blog. Or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel to access the live stream. Make sure to click the little bell when you subscribe so that you get notifications about when we start every week. If you would like to sign up for emails, so this is our really good email list. You'll get notifications about our webinars. You'll also receive things from different universities, apprenticeship providers. You can click on the orange register button on our website. That's just at the top right, and that will get you all signed up to our email list. I'm sure you'd like to say a massive thank you to Mandy and Donovan with me. They've been absolutely fantastic today, and I hope you've got lots of really good advice to take forward with you in writing your personal statement and hopefully getting into your dream university as well. Thank you very much to both our Zoom and our YouTube viewers. You've been fantastic. We've loved all of your questions, and I hope we've been able to answer lots of those for you too. From me and the whole UK University Search team, thank you, stay home and stay safe.